The path to manhood in Comanche society demanded blood. Every young warrior understood that his standing among his people could only be earned through combat prowess and hunting skill. The spilling of blood, whether from the swift arrows that brought down buffalo or the sharp blades that struck down enemies, marked the essential transition from boy to respected warrior. This sacred tradition penetrated every aspect of Comanche life, from their earliest childhood teachings to their most solemn ceremonies, woven into the very fabric of their existence through generations of practice and belief. The Comanche way of war was immutable, honed through centuries of combat on the vast plains they claimed as their domain. As Texan settlers pushed their way into the borders of Comancheria, they discovered this truth with brutal clarity. The newcomers found themselves facing a people whose entire society was built upon warfare, whose young men had trained since childhood in the arts of mounted combat and swift, devastating raids. These raids formed an impenetrable barrier against Western expansion, creating a blood-soaked boundary that few dared to cross. Year after year, Comanche warriors descended upon settler communities, leaving destruction in their wake. The annual toll was staggering. In the bloodiest years, hundreds of settlers met violent deaths at the hands of Comanche raiders. The human cost mounted relentlessly across the decades. Thousands of captives were taken, bound, and led away across the plains to Comanche camps. Behind them, they left the ruins of their former lives, homesteads reduced to ashes, fields trampled under war ponies' hooves, the accumulated work of years destroyed in hours of violence. Welcome to Histories and Native Tales. We turn our attention to one of the most devastating demonstrations of Comanche martial power, the raid on Elm Creek in 1864. This attack would become legendary for its ferocity and scale, marking a pivotal moment as the Comanche sought to reassert their dominance over a frontier weakened by civil war. By the 1850s, the balance of power had begun to shift, bringing significant changes to the Comanche way of life. The mighty Comanche, who had dominated the southern plains since mastering horsemanship, found themselves in an unfamiliar position, defending their territory rather than expanding it. American settlement pressed against their borders with increasing intensity, bringing new challenges to their traditional way of life. The Texan settlers proved far more formidable than the Spanish adversaries the Comanche had previously encountered, demonstrating a tenacity and combat effectiveness that demanded respect. The Texas Rangers emerged as particularly dangerous opponents, having studied and adopted the very tactics that had made the Comanche so feared. These frontier lawmen learned to fight from horseback with precision and speed, matching the Comanche's legendary mobility. The introduction of the Colt revolver transformed the dynamics of plains warfare. For the first time, mounted fighters could deliver multiple shots rapidly, rivaling the devastating rate of fire that skilled Comanche warriors achieved with their powerful bows. This technological advantage, combined with increasing pressure from settlement, began to erode the Comanche's military supremacy. Disease struck an equally devastating blow, particularly among the southern Panataca Band. As their numbers dwindled and contact with American settlements increased, some Comanche groups, especially those living nearest to American territories, began considering an unthinkable option: walking the white man's road. This euphemism for abandoning their traditional lifestyle in favor of settled farming represented everything the Comanche warriors despised. The very thought of giving up their free-ranging life of hunting and raiding to tend crops filled them with revulsion. The younger warriors, in particular, viewed such suggestions with open contempt, and the majority steadfastly refused to abandon their ancestral ways. Despite these mounting pressures and occasional American successes, the Comanche remained a formidable obstacle to westward expansion. Their presence continued to deter settlement across vast stretches of territory, particularly in regions where settlers sought to establish themselves on the Buffalo Plains. This delicate balance of power might have continued indefinitely, if not for a momentous development. In 1861, the outbreak of civil war among the Americans themselves. The American Civil War fundamentally altered the balance of power along the Texas frontier. The Confederate Army's desperate need for manpower drew thousands of able-bodied men eastward to the battlefields, leaving settlements vulnerable and defensive positions undermanned. This military exodus stripped the frontier of its most experienced defenders, dismantling the protective network that had held the Comanche at bay for years. Both the Union and Confederate governments, recognizing the strategic importance of maintaining peace on the frontier, attempted to negotiate with the Comanche, offering supplies, protection, and material support in exchange for their agreement to cease raiding and adopt an agricultural lifestyle. Several Comanche bands initially accepted these overtures, signing formal treaties with promises of peaceful coexistence. However, these agreements quickly proved hollow. The Indian agencies, stretched thin by the demands of war and hampered by bureaucratic inefficiency, failed to fulfill their commitments. By 1862, this breach of trust coincided with the Comanche's growing awareness of a transformed frontier landscape, one that practically invited exploitation. The once fortified borderlands had grown notably vulnerable. Settlements that had bristled with armed defenders now stood quiet and exposed. The declining frequency of Comanche raids over the previous decade had lulled many communities into a false sense of security. This period of relative peace came to an abrupt end as Comanche warriors recognized their tactical advantage. The year 1863 marked a dramatic resurgence of Comanche military power. Their raids intensified in both frequency and boldness, striking deeper into settled territories with virtual impunity. The renowned historian T.R. Fehrenbach captured the severity of the situation, noting that the northwestern counties existed under virtual siege. The raiders struck with increasing confidence, driving off cattle herds and leaving a trail of violence in their wake. The death toll mounted steadily as the Comanche reasserted their dominance over the weakened frontier. The settler population found themselves in a nightmarish situation, watching helplessly as their defensive perimeter crumbled. Without adequate military protection, they could offer little resistance to the sustained Comanche attacks. This deteriorating situation set the stage for an unprecedented demonstration of Comanche military power in 1864. Little Buffalo, one of the few remaining warchief of his people, prepared to launch the most ambitious raid in over 20 years. As he contemplated this massive undertaking, the experienced leader waited patiently for the spiritual sign that would sanctify his war party's mission. The spiritual dimension of Comanche warfare followed strict protocols deeply rooted in traditional beliefs. No war party, regardless of its potential for success, would venture forth without proper spiritual sanction. These divine signals manifested through various channels: in the shifting patterns of smoke from sacred fires, in the flight paths of eagles across dawn skies, or in dreams that came during medicine vigils. The interpretation of these omens required both wisdom and spiritual authority. A warchief seeking guidance might spend days in prayer to the eagle spirit, watching intently for signs in the natural world. The sight of a hunting eagle swooping down to seize its prey might serve as a powerful omen, signifying divine approval for the proposed raid. Little Buffalo, as war chief, carried the weighty responsibility of interpreting these signs for his people. He needed to demonstrate convincingly that his puja, his spiritual power, was strong enough to shield his warriors from harm and guide them to victory. The historical record does not preserve the specific vision that prompted Little Buffalo's call to arms. Yet the evidence of his spiritual authority lies in the unprecedented response to his summons. In a time when large-scale war parties had become increasingly rare, he succeeded in gathering hundreds of warriors under his leadership. This remarkable assembly testified to the warriors' deep confidence in his puja, especially significant given the reduced frequency of major raids in the years before the Civil War's disruption of frontier defenses. For the young warriors who answered his call, this raid represented far more than an opportunity for plunder. Their participation fulfilled a fundamental requirement of Comanche manhood. The tribe's social structure demanded proof of martial prowess through the shedding of enemy blood. This warrior initiation paralleled the requirement to demonstrate hunting skill, both serving as essential markers of masculine achievement in Comanche society. Those who failed to meet these twin challenges faced severe social consequences. The community showed no tolerance for cowardice. A man who had not proven himself in both hunt and battle would find himself ostracized, subjected to mockery even from children, his status permanently diminished in the eyes of his people. The Comanche system of honor found its most potent expression through warfare, and no military venture could begin without the performance of the sacred war dance. Though Comanche society maintained relatively few formal ceremonies, the war dance stood apart as a ritual of profound significance, marking the transition from preparation to action. On the night before departure, warriors assembled around a massive bonfire that sent sparks spiraling into the darkness. Each participant's face bore the ceremonial black paint, symbolizing death and striking fear into their enemies' hearts. The dance itself followed ancient patterns. Warriors stomped the earth with rhythmic precision, their feet driving in unison against the ground. Their voices rose in traditional chants that had echoed across the plains for generations, while their bodies launched into powerful leaps that demonstrated both athletic prowess and martial readiness. The women of the tribe formed an essential part of this ceremony, creating a circle around the dancing warriors. Their voices joined the warriors' battle cries, their enthusiasm matching the intensity of the men's performance. This unified display of tribal support strengthened the warriors' resolve and reinforced the communal nature of their military endeavors. Following tradition, Little Buffalo's war party planned their departure for nightfall, timing their movement to coincide with the full moon's illumination. The autumn season proved ideal for their venture. The plains grasses had reached their full height, providing abundant forage for their horses. The raiders' preparation showed their deep understanding of mounted warfare. Each warrior brought 3 horses, allowing them to rotate mounts and maintain peak speed throughout the campaign. As the feared Comanche moon cast its silver light across the landscape, Little Buffalo led his warriors into the darkness. Their path set toward Elm Creek and the promise of martial glory. The timing of this raid coincided with a critical weakness in Texas's defenses. Since the Civil War's outbreak in 1862, the Confederate cause had drained the frontier of its defenders, with over 60,000 young men departing for distant battlefields. The remaining force of less than 30,000 proved woefully inadequate to maintain the territory's security. The Comanche quickly recognized this vulnerability, understanding that the once formidable defensive line had deteriorated into a fragmented and weakened barrier. The Comanche swiftly exploited this newfound vulnerability, launching a series of devastating raids into Texas territory with unprecedented intensity. Contemporary accounts described this surge of attacks as an outbreak, a term that captured both the suddenness and the ferocity of the offensive. The death toll mounted rapidly, with hundreds of settlers falling victim to these coordinated assaults. This period marked a unique moment in American territorial expansion. For the first time, the seemingly inexorable westward movement of settlement reversed course. The scale of this retreat was staggering. Entire communities abandoned their homesteads, joining an eastward exodus in search of safety. The frontier line, which had been gradually pushing westward for decades, contracted dramatically, in some regions retreating as much as 200 miles. Both the Confederate and Union governments, consumed by their own conflict, proved powerless to halt this territorial hemorrhage. No meaningful protection could be extended to these isolated communities. Those who chose to remain represented a particular breed of settler, stubborn, resilient individuals who refused to abandon their hard-won holdings. These families clustered together in fortified positions throughout the region, creating defensive strongpoints that offered some measure of protection during raids. Yet even these hardened outposts suffered from severe manpower shortages. The settlement at Elm Creek exemplified this vulnerability in October 1864, when its residents would face their greatest test. The morning of October 13, 1864, dawned with deceptive tranquility. The 14 families who called Elm Creek home went about their usual tasks, tending livestock, working fields, and performing the myriad duties required to maintain their frontier existence. They had no inkling of the approaching danger. At that very moment, Little Buffalo was leading a force of several hundred mounted warriors along the Brazos River, skillfully guiding them toward the creek's mouth. His war party moved with practiced stealth, their approach masked by the river's natural contours. The war party's first encounter demonstrated their tactical discipline. Upon discovering a father and his two sons, who managed to seek refuge in the cross timber's natural fortification, the Comanche warriors assessed their options with characteristic pragmatism. Their military doctrine strongly discouraged attacks on defended positions, recognizing that even assured victory might come at an unacceptable cost in casualties. Such losses at the raid's outset could compromise the entire operation's success. After a brief exchange of hostilities, the war party chose to bypass this first group, adhering to their strategic principle of engaging only when tactical advantage was certain. This disciplined approach, however, did not extend to their next encounter. Mr. Myers, a settler residing in proximity to Fort Belknap, found himself in a vulnerable position while searching for escape routes. The warriors swiftly overwhelmed him, taking his life and claiming their first trophy of the raid, leaving his remains where he fell. The Fitzpatrick homestead, situated near the river's mouth, presented the next objective. The war party approached with strategic caution, mindful of potential defenders within. Their careful advance was interrupted when a woman emerged from the house, armed with a rifle and shouting defiance. Her tactical error proved fatal. She discharged her weapon while the warriors remained beyond effective range. The shot proved ineffective, either missing entirely or deflecting harmlessly off their buffalo hide shields. The Fitzpatrick homestead, situated near the river's mouth, presented the next objective. The war party approached with strategic caution, mindful of potential defenders within. Their careful advance was interrupted when a woman emerged from the house, armed with a rifle and shouting defiance. Her tactical error proved fatal. She discharged her weapon while the warriors remained beyond effective range. The shot proved ineffective, either missing entirely or deflecting harmlessly off their buffalo hide shields. In the crucial moments required to reload, multiple warriors seized their opportunity. They closed the distance rapidly, overwhelming her defense with a coordinated volley of arrows. After her death, they claimed both her weapon and a war trophy. The assault then shifted to the house's interior, where the warriors discovered 3 women and 5 children, all unarmed and undefended. The Comanche took 7 captives from this encounter. Following established raid protocols, they systematically prepared their prisoners for transport, securing them to their mounts for the journey back to Comanche territory. This methodical approach to taking and managing captives reflected the raid's organized nature and the warriors' experience in such operations. Among the captives, a 12-year-old boy became the subject of a fatal dispute between 2 warriors, each asserting their claim to this particular prize. When their disagreement reached an impasse, they resolved the conflict through a grim solution, ending the boy's life rather than conceding his custody to the other claimant. This incident illustrated the raiders' view of captives as disposable assets in their military operations. The war party maintained its momentum, knowing that prolonged delays could compromise their tactical advantage. Their next objective lay westward at the Hamby homestead, where they would encounter their first significant armed opposition of the raid. Until this point, the operation had proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Apart from the brief engagement with the 3 men who had sought refuge in the cross timbers, an engagement the raiders had prudently declined to pursue, given the defenders' advantageous position, they had encountered minimal resistance. The successful capture of the Fitzpatrick house marked a turning point in the raiders' conduct. Their initial victory emboldened them, particularly the younger warriors eager to establish their martial reputation. These less experienced fighters, driven by the desire to prove their worth and secure plunder, began displaying increasingly aggressive behavior. This shift in temperament became evident as the war party advanced westward from the Fitzpatrick property toward the Hamby residence. The Comanche war party divided into multiple tactical units as they approached their objectives. Their advance toward the Hamby residence was intercepted by 2 formidable defenders, Thornton Hamby, a Confederate soldier recuperating from battle injuries, and his father, the elder Hamby. The 2 men presented an effective defensive posture. Mounted on horseback, and equipped with superior firearms. The Comanche warriors maintained a calculated distance, recognizing the tactical sophistication of their opponents. The Hambys employed a coordinated defensive strategy that demonstrated their understanding of Comanche warfare techniques. They alternated their shots with precision timing. When one man fired, the other maintained a loaded weapon, preventing the warriors from exploiting the vulnerable reload period that had proved fatal to previous defenders. This disciplined approach denied the Comanche the opportunity to execute their preferred charging tactics. Despite their numerical superiority, the warriors found themselves unable to overcome this defensive coordination. They attempted to maneuver around the Hambys, who executed a controlled withdrawal while maintaining their defensive formation. The warriors employed psychological warfare tactics, charging forward on horseback while releasing intimidating war cries, weaving in and out of weapon range in attempts to provoke a panicked retreat that would leave the defenders vulnerable to pursuit. While this confrontation unfolded, another contingent of the war party discovered Judge Williams' undefended residence. The judge's absence on business matters had left his family vulnerable, though they managed to find concealment in a dense thicket near their home. From this hiding place, young Henry Williams, the judge's son, observed the systematic ransacking of their homestead. His eyewitness account, recorded years later, would provide valuable historical documentation of the raid's events and the family's harrowing experience of surviving through stealth and silence. The systematic destruction of settler property was a hallmark of Comanche raid tactics. Their raiding parties methodically devastated any resources they couldn't transport, from household furnishings to livestock, ensuring nothing of value remained for the settlers' use. As this destruction unfolded at the Williams property, the tactical situation with the Hambys took an unexpected turn as the two separate Comanche groups converged. The dynamics of the confrontation shifted dramatically with the arrival of Doc Wilson from the west, mounted and riding hard. He had spent the preceding hours attempting to alert neighboring homesteads to the impending danger. His return coincided with the moment when the combined Comanche force threatened to overwhelm the defenders' position. Recognizing their untenable situation, the three men executed a desperate tactical retreat toward the Bragg ranch, the nearest defensible position. This maneuver, though necessary, played directly into Comanche military expertise. Throughout the plains, experienced settlers knew that retreating from mounted Comanche warriors often proved fatal, as it exposed vulnerable riders to the full speed and mobility of the Comanche cavalry. The pursuit demonstrated the superior conditioning of the Comanche war ponies, which steadily gained ground on the fleeing settlers. As the distance to the Bragg ranch diminished, the three men abandoned their mounts and made a final sprint for the cabin's protective walls. Their desperate race for survival, however, ended in tragedy. In a critical moment of sacrifice, Doc Wilson positioned himself at the cabin's entrance, holding the door to ensure the escape of his companions. The elder Hamby and Thornton successfully reached the interior, but before Wilson could follow them to safety, a Comanche arrow found its mark with lethal accuracy, piercing his heart. His death satisfied the warrior's sacred obligation of claiming an enemy's life in combat, fulfilling the blood rite that marked a crucial step in Comanche warrior culture. As the Comanche let out resounding war whoops, Doc stumbled inside. There, he pulled out the arrow, coughed up blood, and then expired on the dirt floor as the Hambys barricaded themselves inside, the full force of the Comanche war party outside the walls. As the Comanche rode up on the home of the Bragg family, they behaved differently than they typically would. The house was a small two-room cabin, but built to be able to hold up for at least a short period of time in case of attack. Usually, a warchief would look at a situation like this one and move off, but the bloodlust of the warriors had grown with their earlier successes. Little Buffalo had eager warriors who wanted to prove themselves. Gunshots started to ring out toward the Comanche from inside the cabin. Thinking that the rifles of the men were now empty, the warriors would race toward the walls and windows to try to break in. Hitting an enemy with an arrow would satisfy blood rites of Comanche warriors, but touching an enemy held special honor. French observers had documented this practice of physical contact with enemies during combat, terming it counting coup. This martial tradition, shared among various Plains Indian nations, including the Comanche and Lakota, represented the highest form of warrior prowess. The practice carried particular significance because it required warriors to approach within arm's reach of their opponents, who remained dangerous even when wounded. The act of touching an enemy warrior and claiming a trophy from the encounter demonstrated exceptional valor, elevating the warrior's status within their society. However, the Comanche warriors' attempts to achieve these honors at the Bragg cabin met with unexpected resistance. Unknown to them, the cabin's defensive capability had been significantly enhanced by the presence of several women who had arrived earlier with the Hambys, having fled there after hearing the morning's gunfire and screams. These women proved instrumental to the cabin's defense, working with practiced efficiency to reload weapons for Thornton and the elder Hamby. This coordinated effort maintained a constant rate of fire that prevented the warriors from breaching the cabin's defenses. The defenders fought with the desperate intensity of those who understood the consequences of capture. They knew that male prisoners faced ritual torture and execution at the hands of Comanche women upon return to the village, while female captives would be condemned to permanent servitude. The battle developed into a deadly pattern of advance and retreat. The Comanche warriors repeatedly charged the cabin, their horses weaving intricate patterns as they sought openings in the defense. Some warriors, driven by eagerness or inexperience, pressed their attacks too boldly and paid with their lives. Others pulled back when the defenders' fire became too intense, demonstrating the tactical flexibility that had made the Comanche such formidable raiders. Following their established protocols, the warriors meticulously retrieved their casualties from the battlefield. This practice served both practical and strategic purposes, as it prevented their opponents from accurately assessing the effectiveness of their defense while maintaining the warrior's dignity in death. Little Buffalo continued to press the assault, demonstrating the leadership qualities expected of a Comanche warchief by personally participating in the attack. His presence at the forefront of battle served to inspire his warriors and validate his command authority. However, the engagement's momentum shifted dramatically with a single shot from the cabin. Whether by skilled marksmanship or fortune, a defender's bullet found its mark, unseating Little Buffalo from his horse. The warchief's fall carried profound significance beyond the immediate tactical situation. In Comanche military culture, the death of a leader during combat indicated the failure of spiritual protection. Their medicine had proven inadequate. This loss of supernatural safeguard necessitated immediate withdrawal according to their traditions. The spiritual setback manifested at a critical moment for the cabin's defenders. The elder Hamby had sustained injuries from multiple Comanche attacks that had rendered him combat ineffective. Thornton, despite suffering several arrow wounds, maintained his desperate defense even as his strength ebbed. The women, who had proven essential to the defense by reloading weapons, now sought shelter beneath beds, acutely aware of the fate that awaited them should the warriors breach the walls. The Comanche withdrawal proceeded with the same precision that characterized their approach. Their retreat protocols, refined through generations of warfare, emphasized speed and security. The war party directed their course northwest toward Comancheria, maintaining their pace through the night under moonlight. They transported their acquired goods, captives secured to horses with leather restraints, while driving captured livestock ahead of the main group. The withdrawal incorporated sophisticated tactical measures to prevent pursuit and protect their gains. The large war party dispersed into smaller units, each taking different routes to complicate any attempts at tracking or ambush. This dispersal strategy proved effective, but also led to additional encounters. During their return journey, one group encountered Mr. McCoy and his son traversing the prairie. Mr. McCoy and his son met the same fate as previous encounters, their scalps taken as trophies to be preserved and displayed on ceremonial poles upon return to the village. The war party's effectiveness was further demonstrated when they encountered a group of 15 Texas Rangers along the Peace River. Despite the Rangers' reputation as capable fighters, they proved inadequate against the superior numbers and tactical proficiency of the Comanche warriors. 5 Rangers fell in the engagement, while the survivors counted themselves fortunate to escape with their lives. The Elm Creek raid exemplified the hallmarks of Comanche military operations. Their approach utilized stealth and darkness, striking under the cover of moonlight. Their execution combined methodical efficiency with tactical flexibility, claiming lives, gathering plunder, and taking captives. When circumstances indicated the failure of their spiritual protection, they demonstrated pragmatic wisdom by withdrawing promptly, leaving a landscape transformed by their passage. Discover more compelling frontier histories and Native American military traditions by subscribing to our newsletter. Join us in exploring the complex dynamics of American Western expansion.